Alrighty, so today we've got my early leader tiers for Twilight of the Republic. Gonna go through the 18 leaders, kind of put them into different sections based on how excited I am to work with them, how good I think they are. I don't use like the generic tier list like D, C, B, A, S tier. I have my own names for these tiers. They're not entirely based on power level, although that is a major focus of them. I think a lot of it too is kind of where I think they might fit in relative to like other leaders that have already been established as good. Some of it is, I see like high potential but maybe low floor kind of situation. So like if they're good, they'll be really good, but most likely they just won't be good. Like there is a lot of like on a spectrum sort of conversation. The main takeaway here is you should probably listen to what I say about them, not so much just skip through and see and yell at me afterwards about what tier I put them in. Although that's cool with me if that's what you want to do too. Anyway, before we get going, please hit that subscribe button. It helps out a ton. Check out the Patreon too. I have a lot of new decks going up there for set 3. It's a whole collection in there for like early testing. I think it's pretty cool. All right. Let's see. Tier no. So this is my lowest tier. And it's got 4 leaders here this time. And it's not that I think they're awful. It's just that I think mostly to me right now, they're not gonna be good enough to really crack into like a significant meta portion. We got Obi-Wan here. He's kind of generic. I don't think his ability is particularly strong. There are a few units that like work cleanly with it, but overall I'm just not particularly excited about building with him. He's a 6 cost deploy. You'll notice that, well, not this slide, but the next one, it's gonna have a lot of 6 drop leaders on them. I think they are in a really tough spot, generally competing in a weird area where like they're not quick enough to come out like the 4s and 5s, but they're not like big and massive enough with their abilities and their deploy as the 7 and 8s, and they're like just kind of caught in between. Their stats are usually more closer to like the 5 drop slot. Their abilities are usually a little close to that too, but that extra turn to deploy, not great. But Obi-Wan, he flips. He's a 4/7 Sentinel. 4/7 stat at 6 is not particularly impressive when you can get that stat line at 5. Even other 5s that aren't Boba Fett are usually 4/6. That like you're not getting enough of a stat premium. Sentinel is not enough for me. I think Obi-Wan is going to fall short. Padme is a 5 cost deploy. However, I think there's a little bit of tension with her ability, which requires a substantial board state, right? You need 3 units in play to use her leader ability. Of course, she is a unit when she deploys, so that restriction becomes a little easier once she's out there, but I don't see it being super easy, to trigger it, and super impactful when you do, because it still costs resources. We know like Cassian, for instance, is also a 1 cost ability to draw a card with, I think, an easier restriction to meet, but it still wasn't a great ability. Hunter has a draw card ability for 1 that isn't very good. I just don't know how impactful that kind of ability is. And on top of that, a go wide coordinate deck, to me, at least initially, looks to me like it's going to need to be aggressive. Like you're going to go wide with little units. You're not probably wanting to go into a late game, but her ability looks to me more about late game card advantage engine, not so much board control. On top of that, her deploy being a 2/7 restore 1, I think is fine. I don't think that stat line is bad necessarily. It reminds me a little bit of Krennic, although he has restore 2 and can gain an extra power with his mini grit ability. So Padme, not super exciting. Jango, this one's gonna be a little quicker for me. He's not Boba Fett is mostly the issue with Jango. He's smaller than his son. He doesn't get to use his armor, and he doesn't get to cheat resources. And although his ability is okay-ish, right, it works decent with some like splash damage abilities. Think Overwhelming Barrage, right? Like you kill one thing and then you have that extra damage, you exhaust something. There's other abilities like that. I think like P-38 Starfighter, for instance, is a really good card with him, right? It comes down and does 1 damage to something. Would then exhaust that unit. It's not a terrible ability, but it's not as good as Boba's ability. He does get to use Fire Spray, so like I actually think like the floor on this leader isn't super low. Like I think he'll be fine. It's not that he's like the worst leader. I just think there's clearly a better one. So it's not particularly exciting for me right now, but you know, maybe this ability proves to be much better than I'm identifying it as early on, right? I haven't played a ton with this, so it's not like I'm fully convinced that his ability is nonsense or not good. And he does get to use Fet's Fire Spray. His stat line is fine. 3-7 is a good stat line. I actually like that stat line. It's not 4-7, right? And unfortunately, he has to be compared to that because he's the exact same color and the exact same deploy cost as Boba Fett. So there's always going to, like, that comparison cannot go away for Jango. And I think he falls short. And the last one in this tier for me is Pre Vizsla. Again, another one that I actually don't think like his floor is going to be super low. It's not like he's awful. It's just I can't see him really breaking through into a top tier, and that's like why he's here. 4-6 stat at 5 is fine. I just don't think his ability is going to be clean. Like there aren't very many cards in this game that give you more than one draw. And the ones that do typically aren't very strong. So you have to kind of like play cards that I wouldn't really want to play if you want to make good use of his ability, because frankly, if you're only doing 1 damage with his leader ability, it's just a bad version of like a Vader ping, right? So you need it to do more, and there aren't a ton of cards that do that. I don't think it's going to be very easy to flip him on turn 3 or turn 4, sorry, as a 6/6. Although you can work at that. That's probably the angle I'd most want to focus on, because that's kind of the broken thing about him. If he can be a 5 deploy 6/6, that's strong. It's just, again, like that usually will involve skipping a turn or playing like a weak draw card on one of the turns leading up to his flip. And I think that could just lead him into getting run over. So not super hyped about Pre Vizsla. But I don't think he has a super low floor. There will certainly be leaders later on here that could very well like end up below him in total power, but I think currently present a little more potential than him. All right, tier unlikely. This is my largest tier. This has 7. So there's a common trend here. 4 of these leaders are 6 cost deploys, and we're going to go through them first. So it's General Grievous at number 1, and I think he's probably the closest one here for me to bump up a tier, because he does have a stat line that can support a 6 deploy. He's a 4/8, and I think his ability is fine. And I think that stalling Sentinel ability on like the little droids, although a bit clunky because you need to get the droid out first and then Sentinel it. It's a little more action intensive than like Chewbacca's ability, where he can just like play the card and give it Sentinel. But of course, making your opponent waste time attacking 1/1s is pretty valuable. And General Grievous, I was very close to putting him 1 tier above this, so it's kind of why I started here. But I still have a hard time with these 6 deploys. I know maybe it's a shortcoming of mine, but there's basically only one right now that I think is like decent, and it's Rey. I guess I would probably say Iden is fine too. The thing is, Iden is like barely a 6 cost deploy. She's just kind of a leader that says like your base has plus 10 health. It's not so much about her deploy. I like a few other ones. Like I like Cad Bane. There's a few others. I'm not gonna like mention all of them. It's just most of them have simply just fallen short of being top tier because that deploy cost has not yet given them enough power. And it's the last I'm going to say about that, because I'm kind of repeating myself on that. But General Grievous is getting a decent amount of power. It's just his ability isn't super smooth to use, and it relies on this battle droid centric build, which I think might be able to get like countered or exploited, no pun intended, by some hate cards that have been introduced, and simply by targeting very specific units and keeping the big payoffs off. Anakin here, so he's a red hero, and he has to be aggressive. I know his ability is about board trading, but because you're hurting yourself, there's just no way you can do a long game with this. You're going to end up in racing situations. You're making him be a very big deploy, ideally. Like, he flips into like a 7-7, potentially an 8-7, right? Like, that's kind of the gimmick here, is that you use his ability to like maintain board and then flip and close, because you're going to be almost dead by the time that happens anyway. It's just that I think that build, that aggro red hero build, it's just going to be better with other leaders, most likely, like Sabine, even Ahsoka. It's going to be difficult, I think, for Anakin to like be better than those, because again, that deploy. But his ability is pretty strong. I think the being able to trade up pretty substantially, like this is a very beefed up version of like Moff Gideon's ability, even Gar Saxon, who gives like that passive +1. +2 is a lot, and like you can play shielded units, especially in yellow. Like, you get 6 2/2s with a shield. I think that would be a fantastic start in an Anakin deck. Of course, anything with overwhelm is another thing that like you'd be able to like clear units and push damage, so that like once the time has come and you're almost dead, your opponent will also be almost dead, and you can flip Anakin and just close the door. But 6 cost deploy, I think it's an issue. Nuke Gunray. I think exploit is a cool strategy, and he does work well into it. I'm just much higher on the other exploit-centric leaders. He has a very conditional leader ability, requiring 2 units to die before you can get the droid. Now, getting a free droid is strong, but I don't know how many in a game you can count on really getting, how many times you're going to be able to like really get 2 of your own units dead every turn. Now, the chain does start. Once you get one of these droids out from him, you're probably more likely to be able to like get more units to die, but you're really all in on kind of self-sacrificing your units and exploiting. I think unless you're like triggering droids every turn, you might have a problem. On top of that, his deploy is very weak. He's a 2/8. He attacks into a battle droid, that's fine, but he is not helping you stabilize. A lot of other 6 deploys also have that struggle, but they at least have like actual power to them that they can help, and Newt doesn't. So as far as exploit strategy, I am much more focused on the other ones, which we'll get to, than I am on Newt. And the last 6 drop here is Maul. He doesn't seem very good to me, frankly. His front ability to give a unit overwhelm, it's very conditional. I guess the goal here is, again, it's aggressive, right? Like, there's nothing, you can't be giving things overwhelm and flipping into a 6/6 and not be an aggro deck. But you're a 6 deploy leader, which already means it's hard to aggro the 4 deploy leaders or the 5 deploy leaders, because you are simply behind them on the leader deploy. The overwhelm ability is not helping you in board control. Simply, you need to like have units that have big power so that you can like trade and then like get some splash damage. It's similar to like the Anakin thing I was talking about, although I do think Anakin probably is cleaner than Maul in this sense. Maul also flips into a 6 health leader, which, you know, I've been through this with Grand Inquisitor, another leader I really like that like also digs into like aggro builds. I think they're actually kind of similar in that sense, and like they're aggressive 6 deploy leaders, but they both get punished majorly by only having 6 health. Now, Maul has 6 power. GI can also kind of have 6 power, right? Because he can attack and ready something. So it's not even that different to me. But I think there is a major shortcoming on having a 6 health deploy on 6. And, you know, I don't see him being top tier. Next, I got Mace. So Mace looks like an interesting build around. He does make a lot of like the cheap red burn cards a little better, like Daring Raid, Open Fire, Grenade Strike, all the Bombing Run. Like, oh, there's so many of them. And his ability is pretty good with them, but he comes out very late, and it's hard to stabilize with all those cards, because those cards often don't trade well on action economy, especially if you need to use Mace's ability. Being 7 deploy and being so focused into damaging red cards could also mean you have a problem with shielded units. You're definitely going to have a little bit of a struggle catching up on board until you're able to flip them. You can create a pretty big flip turn potentially, especially if you set it up earlier, but his stats, they're Vader-esque, they're good. I just think it requires a lot of setup, especially if you're trying to stabilize on his flip. It's going to be hard because you need to do things beforehand. And if he doesn't flip and like kill something, then you're still gonna get hit. You're still gonna be falling behind. And I think he might just have a little bit of a hard time staying in games unless things line up very well for like the removal and like the damage cards that you're playing in red. Nala say this one might this one I think I might get some pushback. I just don't think this leader is very good. I think this reminds me a lot of Hera. Obviously, it's got very similar text. You got no leader ability on your non-deployed side. It's just you can play clones. Great. There are some good clones. Am I willing to give up a leader ability and be one of the weakest leader deploys in the game just so I can play some clones out of aspect? I don't think so. She's a 1/7. Now she does cost 4. So there's potential there, not because of her leaders, but because like you can put equipment upgrades on her and stuff, and like then her stat line can become relevant. But as just a 1/7, it's a completely worthless unit. It's probably not even worthwhile for you to use an action to attack with her because you'll just be giving up initiative to do nothing. The ability of like healing off clones, I mean, you really need to be playing a ton of clones. She needs to be in play. I don't know, I mean, you can maybe count on 4 health or something if you like really build towards that, but it's just not a great unit, and it's not a great leader ability. So it all comes down to like, do we want to play a bunch of clones in our villain blue deck? And like, I don't think so. Like, the best clones are Tech and Wrecker, and like, sure, Tech is fine. Wrecker doesn't really do the thing for me in a villain blue deck because you're blowing up your own resources. So are we playing like a low curve villain blue deck? I guess maybe if you're just gonna play like clone aggro, but can't we just do that in a hero deck and just like play the good clones in 2 colors and not have to like basically say we're not playing with a leader? I think we can. I think it would be better, and I think Nalase is cool. I just don't think it's gonna end up being particularly competitive currently. And the last one in this tier is Asajj Ventress. Asajj is cool, and I like 4-cost deploy. This one, I mean, maybe it's just like because they're the same cost, but it reminds me a little bit of Kylo, right? You're playing like a very aggro leader. You're trying to push damage early. You have this like cheap deploy that's pretty vulnerable to basically everything because it only has 4 health. Her thing is that she pushes damage with events. His thing is he's pushing damage by discarding cards. You know, there's some similarities here. Most Kylo decks are also just paired with yellow, which is another reason. But my issue with Asajj is that it's just kind of action intensive, right? You need to play the event first, and then you can use her ability. But if you play the event first, they might just kill the unit. It's the same issue that Kylo has, right? Where you have to buff the unit, and then they could kill the unit. Now, Kylo, we did work a lot to like do this on durable units, usually like shielded units, so that you can like more cleanly make sure that you're getting the attack off. But Asajj, it's less damage. Her front ability is not like, right, it's +1 and you get to attack. Now her leader ability, where it does it to herself and she hits first, is interesting. There is something interesting about that, especially because of her ability to potentially one-shot leaders, because you could do something like surprise strike off of her and deal 7 to something, right? 7's a pretty big magic number. So, all right, we're using her to like one-shot leaders, but that's not aggressive, right? That means we're taking our turn, instead of dealing 7 damage to our opponent's base, we're dealing it to a leader, which of course might be necessary, but we also need to play a ton of events, right? You need to play probably like 15, 20, maybe even more events in your deck. There are a lot of pumps in yellow. We just got a new one as well that gives +2/+0 and Saboteur. So I think Asajj will be a pretty cool build around, and I do think she also has some potential. But in the end of the day, they gave the villain aggro 4-drop leaders for health, which is a major liability compared to something like Sabine, who has 5. All right. This is tier, question mark, basically. Not gonna, I have no idea where to rate this. He's fun. he could be good. It's going to take a lot of work to get this to really really get there, because it's not about just like triggering him and making sure he flips back and forth correctly. It's making sure you have the right hero cards and the right villain cards at the right time to be able to actually play cards even after you flip or before you flip. The sequencing is going to be very challenging to build here. To remember, you have no leader deploy, so I think this lends itself a little more to an aggressive style, because the longer the game goes on, that sure, that helps you. If you can flip 15 times, you're getting tons of value. But there's going to be a critical point in this game where your opponent plays a leader and might just be able to like completely start pushing advantage into you because you didn't get that. So there's a tension here where you might need to be closing the game out before like they take over with their leader. And that's why I think my first stop would probably be working on a little more aggressive stuff. Like, you can treat his leader abilities here as sort of like, if you flip 3 times in each direction, playing like a 6-turn game, you've healed 6, they've taken 6, so it's a 12-point health swing. You're also getting 3 guys that could be pushing damage. You're getting some more cards, so you can find some more reach. That's maybe one way to look at it. But of course, you can maybe try to stall, and like the more you stall and the more you flip, the more that his ability starts to add up too, right? Like, his ability is very good in the first few turns, right? It's way stronger than like any other leaders in terms of like ability. It's just that they catch up when they deploy, and you just don't do that, right? Anyway, this is super exciting. I think it's super cool. Certainly breaks the rules a little bit, which is fun. Just not even going to pretend like I can rate this right now. All right, next is tier maybe. So we're pushing into like some stuff that I think have a little more early potential. All of these leaders are 5-cost deploys. 3 of them are heroism. I'm actually going to do Ahsoka and Rex, the first 2. But Ahsoka's main issue is that she might just end up being worse Sabine. I think it's very, very likely that's actually what ends up happening. But there's a couple things I like about Ahsoka. Number one is I think the lightsaber card that she got in the starter set is very powerful. 1 cost, +2/+0, and attack. Not just with her, but with any unit. But with her, it could be 7, right? Because if she flips and you have 3 units out, she's a 5/6. So she's a pretty beefy deploy if she's a 5/6. It lends itself to like pretty aggressive stuff. We're in Red Hero, which is a pretty aggressive color. We're trying to go wide. Her ability can also push damage, right? If you have 3 units, then think of her ability as a do 1 damage to your opponent. In a game, how many times are you going to be able to pull that off? Maybe twice, 3 times. So you can think of it as like 3 extra damage. How many times do you end up pinging with Sabine in a game? Well, usually a little more than that, but in that sense, I would say it's maybe a little similar. It's just that, of course, Sabine comes out at 4. It's a completely different ballpark than coming out at 5. And that's the shortcoming here. How much do we want to dig into this coordinate strategy? I don't think that much. I think we're trying to like find a way to make it so that when she flips, she's just a 5/6 and be good with that and just have like 3 units. There aren't a ton of ways to like to really go wide. We just simply didn't get a ton of tools for that, but we don't need to go super wide. We just need to go wide enough to get it to a 5/6. So I think there's potential here. Because the aggressive nature of her ability, she can play Energy Conversion Lab as well. That lightsaber is really strong. But the Sabine thing is real, and I think there's a very good chance she just falls short because of that. And then Captain Rex is another kind of build around for going wide. He's a little easier to do all this coordinate stuff with because he just flips into another unit. It's the first leader that does that, and probably what I'm most excited about with him, because I don't think his leader ability on the non-deployed side is that strong. It certainly would be decent in like a grindy game. So in like certain matchups, especially against like hard control decks, just being able to pay 2 to play a guy without having to spend a card, I think could be good as long as you can trigger it reliably. But it is very resource intensive. I don't think it's something you're going to be doing in a lot of matchups, which means you're kind of playing without a leader ability in some matchups. Like, I certainly don't think you're going to do it very often in the first couple turns. So maybe even not at all until he deploys and after he dies. So you're playing maybe short a leader ability, but 2 units in one. You're actually getting 4/9 worth of stats when he flips. He buffs all your troopers. There are some good troopers like Echo Base Defender, Battlefield Marine are both units that get buffed by this. And I think potentially even going mono green, that's probably where you get like some of the better token generating stuff, because you get that manufactured soldiers 3 cost that makes 2 units. It's probably one of the better ways to act, or 3 units if you're doing droids, but mostly you're going to do clones. Actually, maybe you won't, because the droids are also troopers, which get buffed by Rex's ability. But anyway, I think you can also play this pretty aggressive. I think ideally, like, this kind of strategy has to like overwhelm in some way. So like team pumps could be good with Rex, and finding ways to keep units on board with sentinels or buffs will be solid. So Rex, I think at the very least, presents an interesting build around puzzle, and that's kind of why he's here. And next is Quinlan Voss. So Quinlan, I like him. You know, I think his stats are really solid. 3/7 flip. Of course, it's not Boba, but it's a 3/7 flip. He's a force unit, so I think that that definitely carries something, because force throw is such a powerful card. So if we're gonna play him in red, very easy to enable that. If you were playing him in blue, easy ways to enable something like forces with me. But what I like so much about his ability is what I liked about Cad Bane's ability, is that it pairs very well with Tarkin Town in a way so that you can get very early board control and kind of ride that out. His ability is a little clunky sometimes because of the clause where it has to be the same cost. So like your opponent plays a 3-drop, but you don't have a 3-drop, you can't deal damage to it, right? And later in the game, like your opponent has a 4 and a 2, but you want to play your 5, well, you're not getting damage. Now when he's deployed, the ability becomes much better and cleaner because it can hit any unit of the same cost or less, but his ability can definitely be a little clunky sometimes. He's in yellow, so you can look at now there are 2 of us, or now there are 2 of them. The yellow card that the legendary that lets you, if you have 1 unit in play, get another unit of the same trait and play it from your hand. It costs 2 less, so like he can flip into the 7 cost units that have like the force trait, which is strong, right? That's like Mace, Luke. I don't know if that card will actually end up being super powerful because it's very restrictive in what it can do, but it's certainly something that can be built around with Quinlan. But yeah, I'd be looking to like use his ability to get board control. It's also good with ambush units, especially when they can like ambush at the same level. So think like Plo Koon. If you have coordinate with Plo Koon, he can come in and hit for 6 and then hit a 5-drop for 1. That's 7. That's Boba Fett. So Plo Koon can one-shot a Boba Fett. Same with using Energy Conversion Lab with any 6 power unit. So like a Yayla can ECL into a Boba Fett, deal 6, and then Quinlan can do the extra 1 with his ability, deal 7. So there is some play, especially into this like Boba stuff, that is really cool with Quinlan. But yeah, I think he'll be an interesting build around, and could definitely have some potential. And last on this list is Wat Tambor. He's probably the closest one for me to have been bumped up into the next tier, actually. But he's the first pseudo-exploit synergy. Now, it's not the only thing he does, but I do think there is decent synergy there with exploit. Certainly with going wide, I think his ability is really powerful. It's just slow, but +2/+2 is like, it's really good. It can push a lot of damage very quickly. His deploy turn can do it twice, right? First on his leader side and again on after he attacks. So like potentially giving +4/+4 to something. It makes Overwhelming Barrage pretty strong in this deck. Of course, it's a fantastic card in general, but it gets kind of beefed up even more. He is probably my favorite for like the pure go wide strategy. I would look at red and mono green. Mono green even gets the new rare base that makes 2 droids with him. I think his ability can be quite good. It makes like trades really awkward for your opponent, because you have like a couple of units out, you're ready to attack, like they can kill one, but like now you can basically move that unit's power onto the one that survived with Wat Tambor's ability. And then it's not just buffing attack, it's buffing health. It's making it more difficult for them to then trade into that unit. I like this ability. I like that you can self-trigger it with exploit. I don't think I'd be like super all in on exploit. not as much as like Newt or Dooku, but I would definitely be playing some to try to get some value and be able to trigger Watt's ability. So Watt's exciting to me. My worry here is that the go wide stuff could get punished. There's a few cards specifically that look very powerful to me, like Clear the Way in Yellow Hero to just destroy all tokens. There's a blue card that costs 3. I don't remember exactly what it's cost, but it just gives all your opponent's units -1/-1 that also clears all droids. And although you don't have to only be going wide with droids, a lot of the early stuff that does that well is droid related. And I think potentially so far I identifying a bit of a weakness in the strategy in that it could get very targeted and potentially shut down before it even gets going. But Watt is super exciting and he's super fun. He's one of my favorite leaders in this set right now. So definitely going to be working on him in the next couple weeks. All right, next is tier probably, and this one can backfire oh so hard against me because I'm putting 2 7-cost leaders on this list. So please don't yell at me in a month when we're just 4s and 5s all over the place and we can never play a 7-cost leader because the game is way too fast. Just don't yell at me. But I see the most potential here for a shakeup coming from these guys. I see them as the potential 7-cost leaders that can really enter this meta game and really maybe hold their own into some of these more aggressive strategies. So Yoda, his leader ability is not doing anything really significant in terms of surviving other than potentially finding you answers. But he's in a good color for surviving, Blue Hero. And that ability works really well with things like You're My Only Hope, which is a card that I think will be quite solid with Yoda to cheat out bigger units early. Like on turn 2, you can play a 5-cost from the top of your deck. On turn 3, you can play a 6, like an Obi-Wan. Turn 4, a Luke can come down. So like there are ways in the early game to potentially really fight back against some aggressive decks by simply playing an above rate unit early. Triggering this his leader ability doesn't look too difficult for me because it's not only your opponent's units dying, it's your own. So you really get this card filtering stuff, and the card filtering is great. It's just really strong to be able to do this every turn to draw, and then it's not even just like looking at the top and putting it on bottom, like Inferno 4, which is a good card. You can put any card from your hand. You can really start sculpting your turns out with this. It works well with other cards like C-3PO, and there's a new card called Foresight, although I'm not like super excited about that stuff, like just drawing a bunch of cards. Like I want to survive because his flip is very strong. His leader deploy is a 4/9 with Restore 2. Can one-shot most units in the game when he flips. You often don't even need to sculpt the top of your deck because if your opponent has like a 3, a 4, and a 5-cost unit out, or a 3 and a 4, like you know that you're like almost guaranteed to hit, right? So if you want to save yourself some damage, you don't always have to like do the hand sculpting stuff and put something on top and then flip. Although you obviously have that option. So in Blue Hero, we're talking about surviving. It's been a decent color. I think like Rey has shown that she can hang with the top stuff. Maybe she hasn't quite broken through into like the pure top tier, but that Blue Hero shell can be quite strong. And Yoda, I'd look at mono blue, I'd look with red, I'd look with yellow, I'd look with green. I think all of this stuff has some potential because his deploy is very strong. It is a huge catch-up mechanic, sort of like how Palp is a major catch-up mechanic. But this is a little earlier, and you've got Restore built into this leader and Restore built into this card pool in general. So high hopes that Yoda can finally show us that a 7-cost, big, beefy leader and potentially our first major control leader in Hero can really break into the metagame. And Count Dooku, another 7-cost, and what do I like about this? Well, you get to cheat. That's great. His ability to give exploit to separatists that don't normally have exploit is massive. There are some really, really important things you can do with this. Some of them are very obvious, like you can play blue Count Dooku for 5 cost with this guy. that's a very powerful thing as long as you can enable this exploit stuff. But it's not too hard because there are just a lot of units that die into units, making it not too... You don't have to go work so hard to make sure you have at least some fodder around. It's the sequencing that's hard sometimes, knowing like when to play the big unit, when to hold back. And I think that's going to take a decent amount of work to make a coherent deck with this, but I see a lot of potential. There's a few other big separatists that can come out early that is really strong. Invisible Hand could be a 6-cost 4/7 that makes 4 droids early in the game, which I think is even more important. Something like Kraken, which is a 2/5 that costs 5 and makes 2 droids. Well, you can play that on turn 2 for 3. All you need to do is give up one little guy, and then bam, it comes down. It's a 2/5. It makes 2 droids. It can attack, beefing up all the droids that he just made. It's a very strong play. It also gives you food to keep going. You've got Kalani. It's normally a 6-cost 5/7. In Dooku, that's a 4-cost 5/7. That is absolutely massive. Curves really well into Overwhelming Barrage. It even has that ability that lets you pump something +2/+2 if it attacks, and decent chance it's going to be able to attack. But then also look at the 3 costs. Something like General Grievous unit, something like Droid Commando, the 4/3 that ambushes if you have a Separatist out, right? You can play those units for 1, and then you can pair them with other cards, right? Like a 2-drop on turn 2. You can go like General Grievous plus Rune Hako. Or later in the game, you can play like Calculating Magna Guard, who's a 3/4 that can have Sentinel, but you can play him for 1 and then like curve that and then have enough resources to play something bigger afterwards. All that is just it's a puzzle, but it looks to me like this is resource cheating 101. This is like some of the best leaders in the game, Boba, both Hans, right? They all work on this axis where they're like just cheating resources. They're playing more things than their opponent or playing them for cheaper. And Dooku does that. Close out with the fact that he is a 5/9 overwhelm for 7. That is absolutely enormous. It's bigger than Darth Vader. And the overwhelm is actually really nice too, because I think not so much like other 7-cost leaders, he's actually not like, I'm not looking into like big control with this, because I'd be wanting to push damage quicker with this Dooku stuff, because you are cheating resources. You're presenting power plays earlier. I don't think it's an aggro deck, but I don't think it's locked into some control deck either. And him being such a big unit with overwhelm also kind of solidifies that he can push damage a bit quicker than maybe some of these other leaders. Of course, his on attack ability to give something exploit 3. I mean, you can play some really cheap stuff if needed, but I don't usually think you're gonna have that much fodder lying around that that will be super relevant. But potentially does have some relevance. All is to say though, he is still a 7 deploy, which means you're kind of playing without a leader during the majority of the game, and aggressive decks might still be able to like capitalize on that. So with both Yoda and Dooku, I am a tiny bit concerned that I'm just too interested in these build arounds, and then it'll just end up being a little too difficult to get them to where I want them to get, which is, you know, top tier, right? The goal is to get whatever you're working on into the top tier, and we'll see if in this set these more expensive leaders can start to show up a little more in that top tier, or if they are still just a little too slow. All right. If you were counting, you knew this was going to happen, but tier yes, which last set I had exactly 1 during my initial early impressions. It was Kira, and then I bumped it to 2 at the end when I redid it, and I added Han. This time I'm just not confident enough in any of these leaders to put them here. There's nothing that I am identifying as like, yes, this will be a metagame lock. I felt that with Kira. I'm not feeling that here, so maybe this is a little bit of a cop-out. Actually, it definitely is. This is definitely a cop-out, but I was not comfortable or confident enough to put anything in this tier. So if I end up doing a redo for this and one of these leaders ends up in that top tier, I'll definitely end up having something here eventually. And that's all I got. Hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think of these leaders. Of course, this is just early impressions. Could definitely be off on some of this. Haven't gotten to test too much with it, but I am happy to hear your thoughts about my list or what you would think and like what you're excited to build around. So let me know in the comments. And until next time, take care.